The question I should have asked the moment Kalen Vex's tail slid through the white marble pillars of the royal court and sealed the exits shut with one slow, terrible sound was this: if a Serpent King locks every door in the courtroom after you sign divorce papers, are you still his prisoner, or has he just trapped everyone who lied about you? Instead, I stared at the divorce petition beneath my hand and wondered if ink could feel like a funeral. My name was Julian Cross. 26 years old. Scentless Omega. Disgraced royal consort. And according to the 7 men in silver robes standing above me, a traitor scheduled to die before the sun bled out over the gray Atlantic. The court had dressed me in pale gray because Arden believed condemned Omega should look neutral when the law erased them, not quite white, not quite innocent, just absent. They had bound my wrists with execution silk because iron chains would have looked too honest. The silk was beautiful, soft, and tight enough that the hidden mark beneath it burned every time I moved my hand. I did not let it shake. 300 nobles watched from the gallery. Some leaned forward like this was theater. Some hid their smiles behind gloved fingers. Chancellor Vance Hale stood at the judge's platform with his narrow mouth folded into something almost kind, which was how I knew he was enjoying this. In front of me lay the document I had begged for. 12 minutes before they walked me into court. A divorce petition. One last request from a defective Omega who had nothing left to trade except his name. They thought I wanted to free myself from humiliation before the sentence was carried out. They thought I was ashamed to die as Kalen Vex's unwanted husband. They were wrong. I was trying to save him. Buried in the old laws, in a page Vance thought he had destroyed, was a clause written in serpent blood: if a bonded consort was executed for treason, the sovereign alpha shared the death. The curse would not care that Kalen had not touched the poison. It would not care that he had not signed the order. It would follow the bond from my wrist to his heart and drag him down with me. So I signed. I pressed the pen to the paper, drew my name in a clean line, and forced myself not to look at the tall black throne at the far end of the hall. The throne was empty. Kalen had not come. That was good. That was mercy. If he stayed away, maybe he would hate me enough to live. The clerk reached for the royal seal, a round silver stamp heavy enough to make law out of lies. Chancellor Hale lifted his chin. The crowd held its breath. And then the temperature dropped. Not by a little. The whole 50-foot courtroom went cold enough that every candle flame bent blue. Somewhere behind the pillars, stone cracked with a deep, rolling groan. The clerk froze with the seal inches above the page. A shadow moved across the floor behind him. Black and gold. And impossibly large. One noble screamed. Another chair overturned. The great double doors at the back of the court slammed shut before anyone touched them. Then the side doors. Then the balcony gates. One after another, every exit vanished behind a living wall of dark serpent scales. I finally looked up. Kalen Vex stood beneath the archway in a long black coat. His gold eyes fixed not on the council, not on the guards, not on the paper, but on the silk around my wrists. His voice was quiet when he spoke. And that made it worse. Who tied my husband like a sacrifice? No one answered. No one even breathed. Kalen walked down the center aisle, and the court parted for him as if fear had hands. His alpha scent rolled ahead of him, storm-soaked cedar and ozone, sharp with something ancient and barely restrained. It should have been suffocating. It should have made every Omega in the room drop to their knees. Instead, it settled over me like a warning I had been waiting to hear. I wanted to tell him not to come closer. I wanted to push the divorce paper toward him and make him understand that this was the only way I knew how to protect him. But his tail tightened around the doors, locking every liar inside with us, and when he reached my table, He did not look at my signature like a man being abandoned. He looked at it like evidence. Then he placed his coat over my shoulders. Lowered his scent until I could breathe, cedar and rain, held carefully at the edge of my awareness, never pushing, only steadying. And said to the entire court, "No one leaves until the truth does." 3 months before the court door sealed shut, I learned that palaces did not need cages to keep people trapped. Arden Palace sat on a cliff above the gray Atlantic, all white stone towers, black iron balconies, and windows tall enough to make a person feel small just by standing near them. From the outside, it looked like something printed on a royal postcard, bright and untouchable beneath the coastal sun. From the inside, it was a machine built out of rules. Every hallway had a rank. Every door had a permission. Every glance had a cost. I entered through the East Service Gate on a rainy Monday morning with 1 suitcase, 2 borrowed shirts, and a marriage contract folded inside a blue velvet envelope. The guards did not call me Mr. Cross. They did not call me consort. They checked the paper, looked at the blank space beside my scent classification, and one of them said, almost bored, "Defective Omega confirmed." That was the first thing Arden taught me. A person could have a name and still be filed like damaged property. I was scentless. Or close enough that the court physicians had stopped pretending there was a difference. Most Omegas carried something recognizable in their scent: lavender, pear, rain, honey, warm bread. Something that made alpha instincts settle or sharpen. I carried almost nothing. On medical records, it was written as low pheromone expression. In noble drawing rooms, it was whispered as useless. In my own family home in Vermont, it had been called unfortunate. Always with the same careful tone people used for cracked china they had already decided not to repair. My parents had not hated me. That would have required too much focus. They had simply found me inconvenient. A quiet son who did well in school, remembered every deadline, and never caused trouble should have been easy to love. But in an old Omega family obsessed with good matches, a scentless child was a closed investment. By the time the royal entourage came asking for a low-profile Omega with clean blood records and no political allies, my parents had signed faster than they packed my bag. The contract said I was chosen to stabilize the household of Sovereign Alpha Kalen Vex. The servant said I was chosen because no important family would offer anyone better. Both versions were true enough to hurt. Kalen stood at the top of Arden the way a storm stands over the ocean. He was not only an alpha, he was the serpent sovereign, the last living heir of a bloodline that claimed descent from a divine creature older than the kingdom itself. Children learned his crest before they learned the national anthem, a black serpent curved around a silver crown. Adults lowered their voices when his name entered a room. Other alphas stepped aside before he reached them, as if their bodies understood the hierarchy before pride could argue. The first time I saw him was not at our ceremony. It was through a half-open corridor door 2 hours before it, while a maid was adjusting the cuffs of the pale gray suit they had given me. He passed by with 6 council members behind him and no one beside him. Tall. Broad-shouldered. Dressed in black. His dark hair swept neatly back except for one strand that fell near his temple. His eyes were the color of old gold under shadow. I remember thinking he looked less like a groom than a verdict. I also remember how the air changed when he moved. Not heavy exactly, controlled. Like every candle flame, every footstep, every breath in the hall was waiting to see what he would allow. Then he paused. Just for a second. His gaze shifted through the crack in the door and found me. I went still. The maid went still. Even the pins in her mouth stopped clicking. Kalen looked at my wrists first, where the ceremonial cuffs sat too tight against the bone. Then his eyes lifted to my face. He did not smile. He did not speak. He only turned his head slightly toward the steward behind him and said, "Those cuffs are the wrong size." 10 minutes later, someone brought a different pair lined with soft black velvet. For a foolish moment, I thought that meant something. The wedding proved me wrong. Or at least I thought it did. It lasted 12 minutes. The priest read the law. Kaelin placed a ring on my finger with careful hands that never brushed my skin longer than necessary. I repeated vows written by people who had never asked whether I wanted them. The royal council watched from the first row, their silver robes shining under the chapel lights. Chancellor Vance Hale at the center with his smooth white hair and patient smile. When the bond ribbon was tied around our joined hands, it remained dull instead of glowing. A few nobles exchanged looks. Someone behind me gave a soft, pitying laugh. I lowered my eyes and pretended not to hear it. Kaelin heard it. I knew because his fingers tightened once around mine. Not enough to hurt. Only enough to stop me from pulling away. After the ceremony, he escorted me to the north wing, opened the door to a suite larger than my entire childhood house, and said, "No one may enter without your permission." Those were the first words he ever spoke directly to me. His voice was low, even, and difficult to read. I waited for more, an explanation, a warning, a command. Instead, he looked at the fireplace, then at the windows, then at the thin shoes the court had selected for me, and said to the housekeeper, "This room is too cold." Then he left. For the next 3 months, that was how our marriage existed. Not as affection. Not as cruelty. But as a series of almost invisible adjustments I kept trying not to notice. The smoky candles in my room were replaced with clean beeswax after I coughed once during dinner. The hallway outside my suite, which servants told me had always locked from the outside at night, suddenly lost its key. The kitchen began sending tea without citric acid because I had pushed away a lemon slice during my first breakfast. A stack of ancient legal volumes appeared on the small table by the window 2 days after I asked a librarian whether consorts were allowed to enter the royal archive. No note came with them. No signature. Only a black ribbon around the top book, tied in the same precise knot Kaelin used on his riding gloves. I told myself it was guilt. I told myself he was a cold man with decent manners. That was safer than imagining the most feared alpha in Arden had noticed the way I held my breath in crowded rooms. Life in the palace taught me to survive by becoming useful and forgettable. At breakfast, I sat 3 chairs away from Kaelin because the council said tradition required distance until the bond settled, though everyone knew there was no visible bond to settle. At council dinners, I poured water, listened, and let nobles speak over me while I memorized names, alliances, and the tiny pauses people left before lies. In the archive, I copied old statutes until my fingers cramped, translating serpent law from a language most officials treated like decoration. That was where I found the first wrong word. A single term in a recent execution clause had been changed from protected consort to bonded liability. It was such a small alteration that anyone reading quickly would miss it. I did not read quickly. I had built my life around noticing what people assumed did not matter. After that, the palace stopped looking like a machine and started looking like a trap. Pages were missing from bloodline records. Council seals appeared on documents dated before meetings had taken place. The sacred serpent, the ancient creature bound to Kaelin's line, grew restless beneath the palace, and each time the marble floors trembled at night, Kaelin looked a little more tired the next morning. No one else seemed worried for him. They were worried about control. A weakened sovereign was frightening. But a dependent sovereign was useful. I began to understand that my marriage had never been about romance or even tradition. Someone had placed me beside Kaelin because I was easy to blame, easy to erase, and supposedly too powerless to read the laws that made the kingdom run. They had made one mistake, invisible people have time to study the room. The first document that taught me fear was not the forged execution law. It was a laundry inventory. That sounds ridiculous, I know. But palaces are built on ridiculous details that later decide whether someone lives or disappears. I found it on a Thursday afternoon in the Royal Archive, tucked between two cracked leather volumes about coastal tax disputes from a century before I was born. The archive was buried under the East Tower, 3 floors below the public library, where the air always smelled like dust, salt, and old candle smoke trapped in paper. I had permission to copy ceremonial statutes. Nothing more. Chancellor Hale had granted it with a smile that said he believed access was harmless when given to someone no one respected. Most days that worked in my favor. The archivist ignored me so completely that I could have been another lamp. I sat at the far table with my sleeves buttoned to my wrists, my pen moving steadily over parchment while officials came and went with sealed folders, speaking freely because a scentless omega with ink on his fingers was apparently furniture with a pulse. That afternoon, rain tapped against the narrow windows high above the shelves. The Atlantic beyond the cliff was loud enough that every wave sounded like distant applause. I was copying a section on sovereign marriage protocols when a junior clerk hurried through the side door carrying a tray of documents tied in gray string. He looked nervous, the kind of nervous that made his shoes squeak too loudly against the stone floor. He set the tray near Master Archivist Bell, whispered something I could not hear, and left without taking the receipt slip. Bell frowned, shuffled through the papers, then slid one thin sheet to the side as if it annoyed him. When he stepped away to answer a bell at the front desk, the sheet fluttered from the table and landed near my chair. I bent to pick it up. Laundry inventory. North wing. Winter rotation. Linen. Curtains. Guest towels. Execution silk. Ceremonial veils. My hand stopped on the 4th item. Execution silk did not belong in the North Wing. It belonged in the judicial vault, recorded only when a sentence had already been confirmed. The sheet was dated for the following Monday. My name was written in the margin, small and neat, beside the words, gray consort size. For several seconds, all I heard was rain. Not my breathing. Not the scratch of pens. Just rain and the soft, terrible whisper of paper between my fingers. I put the inventory back exactly where it had fallen, because invisible people survive by leaving no evidence of panic. Then I returned to my table and copied 3 more lines of ceremonial law while my mind tore itself apart quietly. By sunset, I knew 2 things. Someone had ordered execution silk for me before any charge had been made public, and whoever placed that order expected the palace household to prepare for my death like it was laundry day. I should have gone to Kalin then. I almost did. I walked all the way to the western corridor where his private council chamber overlooked the sea. The hall outside was empty except for 2 black-armored guards and the low vibration beneath the floor that meant the sacred serpent was restless again. Every window trembled in its frame. I could see Kalin through the half-open door, standing at a long table covered in maps, one hand braced against the wood, his shoulders rigid beneath his black coat. He looked paler than he had at breakfast. Around him, council members argued about border shipments and noble taxes as if the man holding the kingdom upright was not slowly being drained by something they refused to name. I took 1 step forward. Chancellor Hale came out before I could take another. He closed the door behind him with 2 fingers and smiled at me as if he had been waiting. Consort Cross, he said, soft enough that the guards would not hear. Are you lost? I held the borrowed law volume against my chest. No, Chancellor. I was returning a book. His eyes lowered to the title, then to my wrists, where my cuffs covered the faint burn of the mark that had been waking under my skin for weeks. You do enjoy old laws. Such a lonely hobby for someone in your position. Someone in my position has a lot of time, I said. It was not brave. It was careless. His smile deepened by a fraction. Then use it wisely. He stepped closer, not enough to touch, just enough that the scent of expensive mint and cold metal reached me. Ancient law has sharp edges. People cut themselves when they mistake reading for authority. I looked at the closed door behind him. On the other side, Kalen said something in a low voice, and every other voice stopped at once. I wanted that steadiness. I wanted to borrow 1 ounce of it and say, "Chancellor, I found my name beside execution silk. I think someone is planning to frame me." Instead, Hale tilted his head, studying me like a page he had already marked for removal. The sovereign has enough burdens. Do not add yourself to the list. That was the moment I understood he was not warning me away from danger. He was warning me away from help. I went back to the archive after midnight. Not smart, maybe. But fear had turned into a wire inside me, pulled so tight I could not sleep, eat, or sit still. The palace after dark belonged to different sounds. Servants vanished. Nobles retired behind locked doors. The ocean grew louder. Somewhere beneath the foundation, the sacred serpent dragged its body along old stone tunnels, slow and uneasy, making the candles shudder in their holders. I had copied enough guard schedules to know the archive had a 7-minute gap between patrols at 12:40 in the morning. I carried no lamp, only a small pocket light and the plain gray cardigan I wore when I wanted no one to remember seeing me. The side lock opened with the archive key I had borrowed from Bell 3 days earlier and never returned, because helpful, forgettable people are trusted with things important people do not notice. Inside, the shelves rose around me like sleeping judges. I went straight to the restricted serpent law cabinet. Officially, only council members could open it. Unofficially, old cabinets are less loyal than old men. The latch had been sticking for weeks. I pressed the lower hinge, lifted, and the door gave with a tired click. The forged clause was easy to find because it was too clean. New parchment. Fresh seal. Language polished until it looked holy. It stated that if a consort bonded to the serpent sovereign committed treason against the crown, the consort could be severed and offered to settle the blood debt. Offered. Such a gentle word for a rager. But I had seen references to an older version in 3 separate indexes. Protected consort. Lawful witness. Co-sovereign in crisis. The pieces did not match unless someone had rewritten the center. I searched until my knees ached from crouching and dust coated the back of my throat. At 1:20 in the morning, behind a false panel in a volume about royal funerals, I found the missing page. It was thinner than the others. Darkened with age. Edged in silver script that shimmered faintly when my light touched it. My hands went cold before I read the first line. A serpent-marked consort shall not be judged beneath the council, for the mark is not ornament but witness. A serpent-marked consort shares not guilt but guardship in hour of sovereign corruption, illness, curse, or coercion. The consort may stand equal in law until truth is restored. I read it once. Then again. Then a third time, because the words refused to become less impossible. Equal in law. Not decoration. Not liability. Not sacrifice. The mark under my cuff pulsed so sharply that I pressed my wrist against my mouth to keep from making a sound. All those nights when Kalen looked exhausted and the floors trembled. All those mornings when the court physician said his condition was improving without knowing why. All those moments my own body felt heavy and feverish after I passed him in the hall. I had thought stress was making me weak. I had thought the palace air was finally grinding me down. But the page in my hand suggested something else. The bond they claimed had never formed was alive. Quiet. Hidden. And being used. A sound came from the end of the aisle. One slow clap. Then another. Chancellor Hale stepped out from behind the shelf of judicial ledgers. Silver robes replaced by a dark house coat. His white hair immaculate despite the hour. 2 council guards stood behind him, their faces blank. My fingers tightened around the page. I wondered how long it would take. Honestly, Julian, Hale said. I expected less from you. I should have run. There was a service door 20 feet behind me, a narrow stair beyond it, and if I reached the laundry corridor, I might have blended into the dark. Instead, I looked at the page, then at his face, and made the mistake of letting him see that I understood. His gaze sharpened. There it is. Such a troublesome little expression. You changed the law, I said. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. You changed what I am. No, he said. We corrected what you could become. He walked closer, hands folded behind his back. A sovereign with an equal is difficult to guide. A grieving, cursed, isolated sovereign is far more reasonable. The words settled into the aisle like frost. Not control of me. Control of Kalen. I slipped the page behind my wrist, under the edge of my cuff. The motion was tiny. He noticed anyway. Give it to me. I stepped back. The mark burned hot. And beneath us, the serpent stirred, a deep rumble rolling through the archive floor. For the first time, Hale looked irritated. Not afraid. Irritated. As if the ancient creature under the palace was a machine refusing to obey. He lifted one hand, and one of the guards placed a sealed vial on the table beside him. It contained a smoky silver liquid that moved without being touched. The sacred serpent will sicken before dawn, Hale said. By breakfast, evidence will be found in your room. By noon, the council will call it treason. By Monday, the household will know why the silk was ordered. I stared at the vial. Then at him. Kalen will not believe you. He will not need to. The law will. He leaned slightly closer. And if you speak of this page to him before the sentence is sealed, the curse already placed in his blood will accelerate. His body is bound to yours more tightly than he realizes. Panic him, and you may watch him collapse before the court has time to save face. The archive seemed to tilt under me. That was the trap. Not silence or death. Choice. If I told Kalen too soon, Hale could trigger whatever he had threaded through the bond. If I stayed silent, they would walk me into court and turn me into the legal reason Kalen broke. I thought of Kalen in the council chamber, one hand braced against the table, refusing to bend while men like Hale measured how much of him they could use. I thought of the velvet cuffs he had replaced. The clean candles. The unlocked hallway. The books left by my window without a note. Small mercies from a man who had never once asked me to thank him. I slid the page fully beneath my cuff and pressed my sleeve down over it. If Hale wanted it, he would have to look desperate in front of witnesses. He did not like desperation. That was useful. You are going to accuse me either way, I said. Yes. Then I want one condition. His brows lifted. I swallowed around the fear in my throat and forced every word to come out clear. Before sentencing, I want the right to petition for divorce. For the first time that night, Chancellor Hale looked surprised. Only for a second. Then he laughed softly, pleased by what he thought was my cowardice. Trying to die unmarried? Trying to leave with the only thing I still own, I said. My name. He believed that. Of course he did. Men like Hale always believed Omegas wanted dignity more than strategy. He stepped aside and let the guards approach, not roughly, not dramatically, just efficiently, because palaces prefer their cruelty polished. As they escorted me out of the archive, I kept my wrist close to my body and the hidden page warm beneath the silk of my sleeve. By morning, they would find the vial where Hale had planted it. By noon, the court would call me traitor. By Monday, I would sign away my marriage in front of the kingdom. And if I did it before the seal came down, if the old blood debt clause still recognized severance, then maybe Kaelin Vex would survive the life built around both of us. For one suspended second after Kaelin spoke, the royal court of Arden became so silent I could hear the ink drying on the paper that was supposed to erase me. 300 nobles. 12 council officials. 24 royal guards. One clerk with the seal still hovering above my signature. And not a single person moved. The only sound came from the living wall of scales coiled across every exit. It shifted slowly against the marble, black and gold catching the candlelight, each movement controlled enough to remind everyone in the room that restraint was a choice, not a weakness. Kaelin stood beside my table with his coat over my shoulders, and the warmth of it nearly broke me. Not because it was grand. Not because it proved anything to the court. Because it smelled faintly of cedar, rain, and the cold ocean air that always followed him in from the western balcony. And for 3 months I had trained myself not to want the comfort of it. I kept my hands flat on the table so no one would see my fingers curl into the fabric. Chancellor Hale recovered first. Of course. Men like him never let shock stay on their face long enough to become evidence. He straightened on the judge platform, silver robes falling into perfect lines, and folded his hands with the calm patience of someone explaining manners to a child. Your Majesty, he said. This is a lawful proceeding. The court understands your personal attachment, but interference at this stage would compromise the dignity of the crown. Kaelin did not look at him. He was still looking at my wrists. Dignity, he repeated. His voice moved through the room colder than the draft from the sea windows. Is that what we are calling execution, silk tied beneath a consort seal? A small murmur broke through the gallery. The clerk lowered the stamp by half an inch without realizing it. Kaelin turned his head just enough for his gold eyes to settle on the clerk's hand. The man froze so hard his sleeve trembled. Put that down, Kaelin said. The clerk obeyed so quickly the silver seal struck the table with a dull sound. Chancellor Hale's mouth tightened. The divorce petition was requested by the condemned party. The council merely honored his final civil right. Final civil right. He made it sound clean. He made it sound like a courtesy. I tasted something bitter at the back of my throat and forced myself not to speak. If I spoke now, if Hale had been telling the truth about the curse threaded through the bond, fear could become a weapon pointed directly at Kaelin. So I stayed quiet. Even while every instinct in me begged to tell Kaelin to leave. To open the doors. To let my name burn if it meant his survived. Kaelin finally looked down at the paper. My signature sat there in black ink, careful and steady, the way I had practiced it in my head while being escorted through marble corridors between guards who refused to meet my eyes. His expression did not change. But something in the air did. The candles bent toward him all at once. The tail around the doors tightened just enough to make the hinges groan. Julian, he said. My name in his voice did something strange to the room. Nobles who had called me defective for months suddenly remembered I had a first name. I looked up despite myself. Kaelin was close enough that I could see the faint shadows under his eyes, the strain he had hidden behind black coats and court silence. He looked furious. Yes. But not at me. That made it harder. Anger would have been easy to survive. This was a tension. This was a question waiting patiently even though the whole court wanted me dead by sunset. Did you ask for this because you wanted freedom, he said. Or because someone convinced you death was the only way to give it to me? The words landed too close to the truth. My hand twitched once beneath his coat. Chancellor Hale saw it. Kalen saw Hale seeing it. His gaze sharpened. Answer only if you choose, Kalen added, quieter. That small mercy hit harder than any command. He had every right by law and by bloodline to demand a response from the Omega standing under his name. Instead, in front of the court that had stripped me of every choice, he gave one back. My mouth opened. Nothing came out. The mark under my cuff flared with heat. Beneath the floor, the sacred serpent stirred deep under stone, and the court felt it as a low vibration under their polished shoes. Hale stepped forward at once. Your Majesty, the condemned has already confessed to poisoning the sacred guardian and corrupting the sovereign bond. His silence now is not innocence. It is strategy. Kalen turned slowly. A confession made under whose supervision? The council's. Which member? The Judicial Committee. Name them. Hale paused. It was brief, less than a breath. But in court, a breath could become a crack. Kalen moved his attention to the long table where 6 council officials sat with their documents lined in ceremonial stacks. Name the official who recorded my consort's confession. No one answered. A woman in pearl earrings looked down at her notes. An older alpha with a red sash adjusted his cuff. Master Bell from the archive stared at the grain of the table as if wood might save him. Kalen took one step toward them, and the guards along the walls straightened so sharply their armor clicked. You held a confession hearing for the legal spouse of the sovereign without sovereign witness, without bond advocate, and without notifying the royal physician. His voice remained calm. That was the terrifying part. You then scheduled the sentence before presenting evidence to the throne. And now you expect me to believe the most urgent threat to Arden is the Omega whose wrists are tied incorrectly. Hale's smile returned. Thinner now. With respect, the law does not require emotional approval from the alpha involved. The room inhaled badly. Even I knew that was a mistake. Kalen's eyes darkened from gold to something older, deeper, the color of coins at the bottom of the sea. The serpent tail shifted behind the judge platform, not touching Hale, not threatening him, simply reminding him there was no exit at his back. Kalen reached toward my bound hands. I flinched before I could stop myself. Not much, just a small retreat, the kind a person learns when too many officials have touched them like procedure. He stopped immediately. His hand remained suspended over the table. Open. Empty. Patient. The entire court watched him wait for permission from a condemned Omega. Heat rose behind my eyes. I hated that more than I hated their accusations. I hated that kindness required more strength from me than fear. Slowly, I moved my wrists forward. Kalen did not untie the silk. Not yet. He leaned closer, studying the knot, and his jaw tightened. This is not a prisoner's restraint. It is a pre-sentence sacrificial knot. Hale said nothing. The clerk went pale. Someone in the gallery whispered, and the sound vanished when Kalen looked up. Who authorized it? Kalen asked. A guard captain near the steps shifted his weight. I recognized him from the corridors, Caleb Shaw, captain of the Royal Guard. Broad-shouldered. Brown-skinned. Always correct. Always distant. He had escorted me from my room that morning without cruelty and without comfort, which in Arden counted as almost generous. His eyes flicked toward Hale before he caught himself. Kalen noticed. Captain Shaw. Caleb stepped forward and bowed. Your Majesty. Who gave the order for execution silk before sentencing? Caleb's throat moved. He looked like a man discovering that obedience had carried him to the edge of a cliff. The order came through the Chancellor's office, Your Majesty. Hale's expression hardened. Administrative preparation is not guilt. The court must be ready for all outcomes. All outcomes, Kalen repeated. He turned back to the council table. Then the court also prepared a pardon decree, a delay order, a physician's appeal, and a bond review. Correct? No one moved. The silence answered beautifully. For the first time since dawn, something like air entered my lungs. Kalen was not defending me with romance. He was dismantling them with procedure. Every rule they had sharpened against me, he was picking up by the handle and turning toward the light. Hale realized it at the same time I did. This spectacle is beneath the crown. Open the doors. Allow the court to proceed, and we can discuss irregularities afterward in private. Kalen looked at the sealed doors. Then at the gallery. Then at me. No raised voice. No dramatic gesture. Just the kind of refusal that made the law rearrange itself around him. There will be no private room for public lies. He removed one glove, finger by finger, and placed it beside the divorce petition. The motion was so controlled that several nobles leaned back anyway. On the inside of his wrist, just below the palm, a thin line of dark scales had surfaced under his skin. I stared before I could stop myself. They matched the pattern hidden under my cuff. Kalen saw my face change. His anger went still. You have seen this before, he said softly. It was not an accusation. It was worse. It was recognition. I pulled my hands back, but the silk caught on the edge of the table, and a sharp flash of heat moved through the mark. I could not hide the wince. Kalen's eyes dropped to my wrist. Julian. The way he said my name this time was almost a warning, but not to me. To the room. Hale spoke quickly. The mark is part of the corruption. Your Majesty. The physician's preliminary report indicates foreign residue in the consort's blood. Which physician? Kalen asked. Court physician Greer reviewed the sample. Across the chamber, Marion Greer stood near the side benches in a dark green coat, silver hair pinned at the back of her neck, face unreadable. Kalen turned to her. Did you call it corruption? Marion's gaze moved from Hale to me, then to Kalen's scaled wrist. Something like calculation passed over her face, followed by a careful breath. No, Your Majesty, she said. The court shifted. Hale went very still. Marion stepped forward with the composure of a woman who had spent 40 years telling powerful people truths they disliked. I called it unknown serpent bond activity. I requested a second test before any legal conclusion was drawn. Kalen's eyes returned to Hale. And was that second test performed? Marion answered instead. My request was denied. The tail around the doors dragged once across the marble, slow and heavy, leaving no damage, only sound. Every person in the court understood the difference. Kalen was still choosing restraint. I looked at him. Really looked. And the careful story I had built to survive him began to fracture. He was the feared sovereign, yes. The serpent alpha whose shadow made nobles lower their eyes. But he was also the man who had noticed tight cuffs, bad candles, locked hallways, hidden cold. He had not failed to care. He had been surrounded by people trained to make care look like weakness and truth look like treason. Kalen picked up the divorce petition at last. My chest tightened. This was it. If he signed, maybe the severance would still hold. Maybe Hale's trap would miss him. Maybe I could keep one useful choice. Instead, Kalen held the paper toward the nearest candle. Silver light crawled across the ink where my name sat. The signature shimmered, then dulled, then shimmered again. Marian inhaled sharply. Death coercion, she said. The paper knows. Hale snapped, that is superstition. That is old law, Kalen said. He set the petition down between us, untouched by flame. A divorce signed beneath execution threat has no sovereign force. My heart dropped. The one plan I had left collapsed soundlessly on the table. I looked at Kalen, and for the first time since the archive, fear broke through my voice. You have to let it stand. The words were barely above a whisper, but the court heard them because everyone was waiting for me to finally sound guilty. Kalen leaned closer, blocking the counsel from my view with the breadth of his shoulders. His scent lowered again, cedar and rain held carefully at the edge of my breath, never pushing, only steadying. Tell me why, he said. I shook my head once. The mark burned. Somewhere beneath us, the sacred serpent shuddered through the stone. Kalen felt it too. His hand tightened on the table, but his voice stayed gentle. Then I will tell you what I know. You were terrified of that paper failing. But not because you want to leave me. You were afraid staying tied to me will hurt me. My eyes stung. I hated him for being right. I hated Hale for making right dangerous. Kalen turned from me before I could betray more, facing the court with my silence sheltered behind him. Until every document, every physician report, every archive order, and every witness tied to this case is read under serpent oath, this court is suspended. Hale's face lost its pleasant shape. You cannot hold the entire nobility in this hall. Kalen's tail sealed more firmly across the doors. And for the first time, a faint smile touched his mouth without warmth. Chancellor, he said. Watch me. For the next hour, Kalen Vex turned the royal court into the most elegant trap I had ever seen. He did not raise his voice. He did not order anyone dragged forward. He did not let the serpent tail at the doors do anything except remain there, a silent black and gold reminder that every polished liar in the room had nowhere better to be. That was what made it terrifying. Hale had built his power on motion. Private rooms. Missing pages. Servants sent away. Signatures collected before witnesses arrived. Kalen stopped all of it by making the court stay still. He moved one chair beside my table with his own hand. Not for himself. For me. The gesture was small enough that the gallery almost missed it, and precise enough that every council member understood the insult. A condemned Omega was not supposed to sit unless the judge allowed it. Kalen did not ask the judge. He set the chair close enough that his coat still covered my shoulders when I sat, but far enough that I would not feel cornered. Then he looked at Captain Caleb Shaw and said, "Remove the ankle restraint." Caleb hesitated for half a second, not because he wanted to refuse, but because the court was watching. And in Arden, a guard could spend 10 years obeying procedures without ever asking who wrote them. Kalen did not repeat himself. Caleb stepped forward, knelt, and unlocked the silver clasp around my ankle. It opened with a soft click that sounded embarrassingly loud in the quiet hall. My foot had gone numb. I tried to hide the unsteady shift in my posture, but Kalen noticed. Of course he noticed. He placed one gloved hand on the back of my chair, not touching me, only making sure no one else stepped too close while I found my balance. That was the first crack in my fear. Not enough to make me trust the room. Enough to make me wonder whether I had misunderstood the man beside me more than I had misunderstood the palace. Physician Greer, Kalen said. Begin with the samples. Marian Greer came forward carrying a black leather case and a stack of folded reports. She moved with the calm of someone who had survived every fashionable panic the nobility had invented for 4 decades. She set her papers on the evidence table, then looked at me, not at Kalen. Consort Cross. May I examine your wrist? The question startled me more than an order would have. No one had asked permission since Hale found me in the archive. My fingers closed around the edge of the coat. The page hidden beneath the silk seemed to warm, as if it had heard its name called without words. If Marion unwrapped my wrist now, she might find it. If Hale saw it too soon, he might force the court back onto his version of the law. Kalen leaned slightly toward me. His voice low enough that the first row had to strain to hear. You may refuse. That did it. Something in my chest tightened so hard it almost became a laugh. I was seated in a sealed court, accused under royal law, wearing execution silk, with 300 people waiting for my ruin, and Kalen Vex was telling me I could refuse a doctor. I looked at him. His eyes were steady. Gold held behind restraint. For months I had mistaken restraint for distance. Now, with his tail across every exit and his hand resting like a shield near my chair, I wondered how many times he had been holding himself back because the world feared what he was, not because he felt nothing. Not the wrist, I said carefully. Hale watched me from the platform. The elbow is fine. Marion understood at once. Or at least understood enough not to question me. She rolled back the sleeve on my opposite arm, checked the faint discoloration left by the council sample, and opened her first report. The substance found in Consort Cross's room was not present in his system at a level consistent with handling, mixing, or administering it. A ripple moved through the gallery. Hale cut in smoothly. Low levels are still presence. Marion looked up over the edge of her glasses. Low levels are also consistent with environmental transfer. Especially if the evidence was placed near his clothing after preparation elsewhere. Caleb Shaw's eyes flicked toward the evidence tray. Kalen saw that too. Captain. You were present when the vial was recovered? Yes, Your Majesty. Who found it? Caleb's jaw tightened. A judicial aide assigned by the Chancellor's office. Hale sighed as if disappointed by everyone's lack of sophistication. Because the judicial office oversees treason inquiries. And who searched Julian's room before the aide arrived? Kalen asked. Caleb glanced at me. Something changed in his expression, not softening exactly, but focusing. No guard from my unit entered before the aide, Your Majesty. We were told the room had been secured already. By whom? Caleb turned toward the council table. The aide in question, a pale young man with ink stains on his cuffs, seemed to shrink behind a stack of records. Kalen did not need to call him forward. The Serpent Oath handled that. A silver bowl was brought to the evidence table, filled with clear water from the court fountain, and placed beneath the old crest carved into the wall. Under ordinary law, oath water was ceremonial. Under serpent law, it was not. Anyone who spoke a deliberate lie before it would carry a temporary scale mark on the wrist until the truth was corrected. It was harmless. It was also humiliating. Which meant the nobility feared it more than pain. Kalen looked at the aide. State your name and your role. The young man swallowed. Miles Everett. Judicial aide second class. I recorded the recovery of the vial. Did you personally find it in Consort Cross's room? Miles looked at Hale. Hale gave him nothing. Yes, Miles said. The water in the bowl darkened. A small patch of black shimmer appeared on the inside of Miles's wrist, delicate as ink under skin. The gallery erupted into whispers so fast the sound became a wave. Miles stared at his own hand as if it belonged to someone else. I mean, he stammered. I was told where it would be found. Kalen's voice remained even. By whom? Miles's lips parted. Hale spoke before he could answer. Your Majesty, this is an intimidation environment. The aide is young. Kalen turned his head. Then he should not have been assigned to build a death case. The word death made the mark under my cuff flare again. I inhaled too sharply. Kalen noticed before anyone else did. His scent had been carefully held back, but it lowered further, not pressing into the room, not claiming territory, only smoothing the air around my chair until the sharp edge of panic dulled. The effect was subtle enough that no one could accuse him of influencing testimony. It was precise enough that my lungs remembered how to work. I hated how much that helped. I hated it even more that he did it without looking for gratitude. He was watching Miles, but his hand shifted on the back of my chair, one finger tapping once against the wood. A question, are you still breathing? I answered by uncurling my hand from the coat. One finger. Then two. It was ridiculous. It was nothing. It felt like speaking in a language the court did not deserve to learn. Marion continued. She read the timeline of the sample. The vial was logged at 8:30 in the morning. But the chemical seal on the report had been activated at 6:15, nearly 2 hours before the search officially began. The archive access record showed my key had been used at 12:41 after midnight, but the tower gate ledger showed Chancellor Hale entering the east corridor at 12:38. A detail no one had thought mattered because council members were allowed everywhere. Master Archivist Bell claimed he had not seen me near the restricted cabinet. The Oathwater gave him 3 black scale marks before he corrected himself and admitted he had been instructed to look away from certain movements in the archive for the last month. Each answer opened another door. Not out of the court, but deeper into the maze. Hale did not crumble. He adjusted. Every time one lie bent, he built a new wall beside it. He suggested I had manipulated Bell. He suggested the aide had misunderstood. He suggested Marion's report was incomplete. He suggested the old laws were too unstable to rely on during a sovereign illness. That last word changed the room. Kalen's hand stilled on my chair. I turned before I could stop myself. His face had not moved, but the scales beneath his ungloved wrist had spread another inch. Faint. Controlled. Hidden if one did not know where to look. I knew where to look now. That frightened me more than Hale did. The curse was moving while we sat there. The trap had not been stopped. It had only been delayed. I reached for the divorce petition before I fully knew I was doing it. The paper lay near the candle, silver light still trapped in my signature. If the first petition had failed because it was signed under visible threat, maybe I could make a new one. Maybe if I spoke clearly. Maybe if I told the court I chose it. Maybe old law would accept a lie if I wrapped enough intention around it. I pulled the page toward me. Kalen looked down. Julian. I ignored the way my name sounded in his mouth. I want to amend my statement. Hale's eyes sharpened with immediate interest. That should have warned me. It did not. I stood, even though my leg protested, even though Kalen's coat nearly slipped from my shoulders and his hand moved as if to catch it before he stopped himself. Choice. He kept giving it back. And I kept trying to spend it on leaving. I requested the divorce freely, I said. The Oathwater remained clear. The worst lies are sometimes built out of one true brick. I had requested it. I had wanted it to work. I looked at Kalen and forced the next words through the heat closing my throat. I do not wish to remain legally bound to the sovereign. The bowl shivered. The candle nearest the paper went out. My signature flashed bright silver, then the edge of the divorce petition curled inward as if the air itself had folded it. The paper did not burn like ordinary paper. It dissolved into soft gray ash that lifted off the table without smoke and drifted down over my hand. No one spoke. Marion closed her eyes briefly. Kalen did not look surprised, only unbearably sad. Death coercion is not only a locked door, he said quietly. It is also believing your absence is the only gift you are allowed to give. I could not answer. If I answered, I would say too much. If I said too much, Hale might trigger the curse. The court was watching my silence like it was guilt. But Kalen watched it like it was a locked room. He picked up a clean handkerchief from inside his coat and held it out, not to wipe my hand himself, just held it where I could take it. My fingers brushed the cloth. Not his skin. Still, the mark beneath my cuff pulsed once, warmer but not painful, like something recognizing shelter after a long winter. I sat down before my knees betrayed me. Kalen shifted half a step, placing himself between me and Hale without making a show of it. The gesture blocked Hale's view of my wrist. It also blocked most of the court from seeing my face. For the first time since the doors closed, I let myself breathe without performing calm. Caleb Shaw returned to the evidence table with a new folder. His posture had changed. Earlier, he had moved like a man carrying out a regrettable duty. Now he moved like someone retracing his own footsteps and disliking where they led. Your Majesty, he said. The guard rotation from the archive corridor has been altered by order. Kalen asked, whose order? Caleb looked at the folder. Stamped by the Chancellor's office. The change removed 2 guards from the East Tower between 12:30 and 1 in the morning. Hale's voice was smooth as glass. Routine staffing adjustment. Caleb turned to the oath bowl. It was listed as a routine staffing adjustment, he corrected. No mark appeared. Then he looked at me. The apology in his face was small, almost invisible. But I saw it because I had spent my life reading small things. Consort Cross was escorted from the archive at 1:19. The official arrest log lists 1:42. That is false. The water darkened briefly, not because Caleb lied, but because the written record had. A murmur traveled through the gallery with teeth in it. Nobles adored scandal when it belonged to someone lower than them. They feared it when it climbed. Hale's patience began to thin. We are losing sight of the central fact. The sacred serpent fell ill after contact with the consort's quarters. Whether certain clerks made procedural mistakes does not change the danger of a defective Omega carrying abnormal bond residue. Defective. He said it the way my family had. The way physicians had. The way servants whispered it when they thought my back was turned. A label with polished shoes. I expected the old shame to rise automatically. It did. But something else rose with it this time. Kalen's coat was still around my shoulders. His handkerchief was in my hand. The whole court had watched my second attempt to erase myself turn to ash because the law itself refused to call fear freedom. Maybe I was defective by their measurements. Maybe I did not carry the scent they wanted, the glow they expected, the obedience they preferred. But I had read their laws better than they had. I had hidden a page under execution silk. I had sat in their trap and kept Kalen breathing for 1 more hour. Hale was still speaking when I interrupted him. My voice came out quiet but clear. If I am defective, why did you need so many forged documents? The court turned toward me. Kalen did not, he was already looking at Hale, but I felt the shift in him. A stillness that was almost pride. Hale smiled down at me. Fear makes people imaginative. No. My fingers tightened around the handkerchief. Fear makes people careful. You were careful before I knew I should be afraid. The oath water remained clear. I kept going because the room had tilted, and for once it had not tilted entirely against me. You ordered execution silk before the charge. You altered the guard rotation before the search. You denied physician Greer's second test before the first report was presented. You prepared the ending first, and then arranged the story backward. Miles the aide stared at me. Master Bell looked sick. Caleb's hand closed around the folder. Hale looked at Kalen, not me. That was how I knew I had struck something true. Men like Hale ignored powerless people until their words became useful or dangerous. Mine had become dangerous. A touching theory, Hale said. But theory is not law. No, Kalen said. But oath is. He looked at Marion. The bond residue. Explain it to the court plainly. Marion opened a second report, older than the first, its edges softened by handling. The substance found in Consort Cross's samples does not match poison exposure. It resembles curse displacement. The nobles did not understand. I did. My stomach dropped. Marion continued, gentler now, though her voice carried. In simple terms, something affecting the sovereign appears to have been redirected through the consort bond in small amounts over time. The gallery went very still. Kalen turned to me at last. The question in his eyes was not whether I had known. It was how long I had suffered without telling him. I looked away. That answer was dangerous too. Hale seized the pause. Where the consort is the source. Marion shook her head. No. The pattern is wrong. If he were the source, the residue would move outward from him. It does not. It moves toward him. My fingers went numb around the handkerchief. The court blurred at the edges, not from fainting, but from the effort of holding too many truths at once. I had suspected the bond was being used. I had suspected I was carrying pieces of Kalen's curse. Hearing it spoken under oath made it real in a way no private fear had been. Kalen lowered himself slightly beside my chair. Not kneeling. Not making theater. Just bringing his voice to my level while the court pretended not to watch every inch of him. Is this why you tried to sever the bond? I stared at the ash of the second divorce paper on the table. I thought if I could get far enough from your name, the law would miss you. And you? He asked. Such a simple question. No one in the room had asked it. Not my parents when they signed the contract. Not the council when they built the case. Not even me, not really. What about you, Julian? What happens to you after you become useful one last time? My throat closed. Kalen did not press. He looked instead at the silk around my wrist. There is something under that bandage. It was not a question. The page seemed to heat beneath the fabric, answering him. Hale went perfectly still. There. The danger arrived so quietly that no one in the gallery noticed. I did. Kalen did. Hale's face became pleasant again. If the consort has concealed evidence, then by law he has compromised this proceeding. By law, I said before fear could stop me, evidence hidden from a corrupt proceeding may be preserved until a lawful witness is present. Hale's eyes flashed. He had not expected me to quote that. Kalen's mouth moved almost imperceptibly, not quite a smile, but close enough that warmth touched the edge of his voice. Which statute? I looked at him. For one strange second, the court faded, and it was only the two of us beside the archive window, books stacked between us, every small unnoticed mercy suddenly visible. Serpent Emergency Code, Section 12. Witness protection during council compromise. Kalen turned to Marion. Can you remove the silk without disturbing what is beneath it? Marion stepped closer, waiting for my answer. My pulse beat against the hidden page. If we revealed it now, everything changed. If we did not, Hale would find another way to bury us before the curse finished what his law began. Kalen held my gaze. Your choice, he said again. The words should have made me angry. Instead, they settled over the shaking parts of me like his coat, warm, careful, impossible to misunderstand. I extended my wrist. The whole court leaned forward. Marion reached for the knot. Hale opened his mouth, but Kaelin's tail shifted behind him, sealing the space with a single slow movement, not a threat, a boundary. For once, Hale stopped speaking. The silk loosened layer by layer. Cool air touched my skin. The hidden page remained folded beneath the inner band, but before anyone saw the parchment, the mark appeared. Silver scales curved around my wrist in a delicate crescent, brighter than moonlight, alive with each beat of my heart. Across the court, nobles gasped. Caleb bowed his head before he seemed to realize he was doing it. Marion whispered something under her breath that sounded like a prayer. Kaelin went utterly still. On his unloved wrist, the dark scales answered. Glowing gold at the edges. For months I had thought the bond was a burden he would resent if he knew. But the way he looked at my wrist was not resentment. It was recognition so fierce it almost hurt to see. Hale's voice cut across the silence, too sharp now to sound calm. An abnormal mark proves nothing except contamination. Kaelin looked at him over my shoulder. Then why, he asked softly, do you look so afraid of it? Hale's fear lasted less than 3 seconds. But 3 seconds was enough for everyone important to see it. The Chancellor had spent the entire trial wearing calm like a second robe, polished, silver, impossible to wrinkle. Then the mark on my wrist glowed, Kaelin's scales answered, and his face changed before he could stop it. Not much. A blink held too long. A breath caught behind his teeth. His fingers closing around the edge of the judge platform as if the marble had shifted under him. That was the first time I believed we might survive the room. Then Marion Greer touched 2 fingers gently to the air above my wrist, and survival became complicated again. She did not press the mark. She did not handle me like evidence. She held her hand close enough for the silver light to reflect along the lines of her palm and whispered, "This is not contamination." The words moved through the court faster than any shout could have. The gallery stirred. A noble woman in blue satin stood halfway from her seat before remembering she was supposed to be composed. One of the older alpha lords near the front bowed his head without thinking, then jerked it back up with visible embarrassment. Even the oath water on the evidence table changed, not darkening this time, but clearing until it shone like glass under noon sun. Hale recovered with a soft laugh. "Physician Greer, I respect your years of service. But a glowing mark is not a legal conclusion." Marion did not look away from my wrist. "No. It is biological, magical, and older than your office." A few people made shocked little sounds at that. Marion finally turned toward the platform, and for once she did not soften her voice for court manners. There are 3 known categories of serpent response. Surface residue, which can be transferred by contact with sacred objects. Temporary scale reaction, which can happen during proximity to the sovereign under stress. And sovereign mate marking, which appears only when the living serpent recognizes a lawful counterpart to the bloodline. Hale's smile did not move. "And you claim this is the 3rd? "I am not claiming it," Marion said. "The mark is." Kaelin stood so still beside me that I could feel the effort it cost him. His unloved wrist remained turned slightly inward, the gold-edged scales there pulsing in the same rhythm as mine. A rhythm I had felt at night when I thought the palace floor was trembling from the ocean. A rhythm I had mistaken for fear. Marion opened the black case on the table and removed a thin strip of pale paper lined with silver thread. "There is a confirmation test. It is harmless. It was designed for disputed royal bonds after the winter succession crisis 200 years ago." Hale's eyes narrowed. "That test requires council approval." Kaelin answered before Marion could. Denied. A brittle pause followed. The Chancellor looked at him. Denied? You do not get to approve whether the truth is allowed to recognize itself. Kaelin extended his scaled wrist toward Marion, then looked at me. He did not move closer. He did not ask in a way that made refusal impossible. He simply waited, hand open, palm upward. The most feared alpha in Arden, offering the court nothing but patience. My chest tightened. The hidden page still rested beneath the loosened inner fold of silk. If I moved too much, it might slip free. If I refused, Hale would use the refusal. If I agreed, the mark might reveal more than I knew how to survive. Kaelin saw the calculation on my face. His voice lowered. Only if you choose. That sentence was becoming dangerous. Every time he said it, some old locked part of me reached for the door. I placed my wrist near his. Not touching. Separated by a few inches of cold courtroom air. Marion laid the silver thread paper between us. At first, nothing happened. Hale's shoulders eased almost imperceptibly. Then the paper lifted at both ends, as if caught by a wind no one else could feel. Silver lines spread from my mark and gold lines spread from Kaelin's, meeting in the center of the strip. The colors twisted together into the shape of a crowned serpent, not drawn, not stamped, but alive with light. Every candle in the court bent toward it. Beneath the floor, the sacred serpent gave one long, low sound. Not restless this time. Answering. Marion's face changed. She had been composed through forged records, planted evidence, and a locked court. Now her eyes shone. She lowered herself into a formal bow, not to Kaelin, but to the space between our wrists. Lawful sovereign bond confirmed. The court broke. Not loudly, Arden's nobility was too trained for that. But the sound that went through them was worse than shouting. 100 careful people realizing the floor beneath their status had vanished. Someone whispered co-sovereign. Someone else whispered impossible. Caleb Shaw stepped back as if the words had physical weight, then bowed slowly and fully, his hand over his chest. The guards nearest him followed. Not all of them. Enough. Enough that Hale's gaze cut toward them like a blade made of winter. I stared at the glowing strip. Lawful sovereign bond. Not absent. Not failed. Not imaginary. For 3 months I had lived in a marriage everyone called hollow, while the oldest law in the kingdom had been breathing under my skin. I thought of the dull ribbon at our wedding. The pitying laugh. The way Kaelin's fingers had tightened once around mine. He had known something was wrong even then. The ceremony ribbon should have responded, Marion said, reading the same memory in my face. A bond this strong would not remain dull unless it was suppressed. Kaelin's voice was very quiet. Suppressed how? Marion looked toward the council table. A dampening seal placed on the ceremonial ribbon before the vows. Rare, expensive, and illegal without sovereign order. The council table became a painting of guilt. No one confessed. No one needed to. The oath water near the table clouded faintly, though no one had spoken, reacting to the weight of silence pressed too hard around a lie. Kaelin turned to the 6 officials seated there. Who prepared the ribbon? Master Bell looked as if he might disappear into his own collar. The woman in pearl earrings closed her eyes. Hale placed both hands on the platform, calm returning to him by force. Be careful, Your Majesty. A suppressed response may also have protected you. Kaelin did not blink. From my own lawful mate? From an unstable, scentless omega carrying an unknown link to the sacred serpent. The word scentless hit the room differently now. Before, it had meant lack. Now it sounded like a door someone had mislabeled to keep people from opening it. Marion turned a page in her report. That is the second matter. I knew from her tone that I would not like it. Kalen knew too. His hand shifted slightly toward the back of my chair, then stopped, as if he refused to make protection look like ownership. Marion spoke carefully, choosing each word for a room full of people who would twist any careless phrase. Consort Cross's low-scent expression may be the reason the curse displacement has not overwhelmed him. A stronger pheromone profile would have reacted more violently. His body did not amplify the serpent curse. It absorbed and diluted small portions of it. My mouth went dry. Kalen turned to me fully now. Small portions, he repeated. Marion's silence answered before her words did. Over time. Yes. The court blurred again, but this time the memories came sharp. The feverish mornings after council dinners. The silver ache in my wrists whenever Kalen passed too close and looked tired. The nights I woke with the taste of salt and iron in my mouth while the floor trembled under my bed. The way the sacred serpent quieted when I sat in the archive above its old tunnels. Not because I was harmless. Because I had been taking in fragments of something meant for Kalen. He understood at the same time I did. The restraint on his face fractured just a little, enough that I saw the grief beneath it. Immediate and terrible. How long? He asked. I looked at the table. I didn't know what it was. How long, Julian? Not angry. Not at me. That made the answer harder. Since the first week. His breath left him slowly. Around his wrist, the gold-edged scales spread another inch. The serpent tail along the door shifted, pushing tighter against the exits, and the marble gave a warning groan that made the gallery recoil. Kalen closed his eyes for half a second, fighting himself in front of the entire kingdom. Hale seized the moment like he had been waiting for it. There. His voice rang clear. You all see it. The sovereign destabilizes in response to the consort. Whether intentional or not, the link is a threat to the crown. Marion snapped, that is not what I said. It is what the room witnessed. Hale lifted a folded statute from his desk. Unlike the old documents, this one was fresh, crisp, sealed in red wax. Under emergency succession protocol, an unregistered consort showing abnormal influence over the serpent sovereign may be removed from proximity until the threat is neutralized. My body went cold. Unregistered, Kalen said. You suppressed the registration. The record shows no completed bond registration, Hale replied. The reasons can be debated later. The immediate danger cannot. He looked directly at me then, and all the softness was gone from his face. A defective Omega with the ability to absorb, redirect, or calm sovereign serpent power is not a spouse. He is an uncontrolled instrument. The words were meant to reduce me to a thing. They almost worked. Then Kalen moved. Not toward Hale, toward me. The court flinched anyway. His scales had climbed past his wrist now, dark and gold beneath his skin, the strain of restraint visible in the set of his shoulders. The serpent beneath the palace rumbled in answer, deep enough to rattle the water in the oath bowl. Panic spread through the room, expensive perfume and badly hidden alpha scent. Too much. The pressure hit my lungs sharp and crowded. Kalen felt it and immediately pulled his scent back, even while his own control shook. That was what decided me. Not the law. Not the mark. That tiny impossible discipline. He was standing in a court that had trapped us both, hearing that I had been carrying pieces of his curse for months, watching Hale turn my survival into a threat, and still his first instinct was to make the air easier for me to breathe. I stood before anyone could stop me. Caleb took one step forward, then froze when Kalen lifted two fingers, not in order to seize me, in order to let me choose. The serpent tail crossed the aisle near my table, thick as a fallen pillar, its scales black as storm clouds and warm with gold light at the edges. The whole court seemed to stop breathing when I approached it. Hale's eyes brightened with triumph, as if any movement toward the serpent proved his case. Maybe it did. I did it anyway. I placed my marked wrist against the nearest scale. The reaction was immediate. Silver light spread from my skin across the dark surface in a soft wave. The rumbling beneath the palace ceased. Kalen's shoulders lowered by a fraction. The pressure in the room thinned until nobles who had been gripping their chairs remembered how to inhale. I did not command the serpent. I did not control Kalen. I simply touched the place where the fear was loudest and let the bond do what it had apparently been trying to do since the day I arrived. The court watched the monster they feared quiet under the hand of the Omega they had prepared to erase. For one beautiful second, Hale had no words. Then he found the cruelest possible one. Exactly. His voice cut through the fragile calm. The consort has demonstrated direct influence over sovereign manifestation in open court. Under the protocol, he must be isolated immediately. Kalen stepped between Hale and me so fast his coat moved like a black curtain. No one touched anyone. No violence crossed the room. Still, the message was absolute. No. Hale held up the red-sealed statute. Then you must resolve the contradiction before the court. Either deny the bond and permit emergency isolation, or recognize him as lawful co-sovereign under serpent law. His smile returned, thin and victorious. And to do that, Your Majesty, you need the original sealed page that your archive has been missing for 70 years. The hidden parchment beneath the loose silk on my wrist seemed to pulse against my skin. Kalen went still. Hale looked straight at me, and I understood with a sick, sudden clarity, he knew I had it. He could not take it quietly anymore, not with the court watching. So he had built a doorway where revealing it might save us or condemn us faster. Kalen turned his head slightly, just enough for me to see his profile. Julian, he said, so softly the room barely caught it. What did you hide? My fingers closed over the inner fold of silk. The court doors remained locked. The oath water shone clear. The sacred serpent waited under our feet. And every person in Arden who had ever called me invisible was now staring at my wrist. I had spent most of my life believing attention was dangerous. And in that moment, standing beside the living tail of the serpent sovereign with the entire court staring at my wrist, I learned that invisibility could be more dangerous than being seen. The inner fold of silk stuck to my skin where the mark glowed beneath it. My fingers felt clumsy, almost too cold to move. But Kalen did not reach for me. He did not take the choice out of my hands, even with Hale smiling from the judge platform as if he had already decided how this scene would end. That was what made me brave enough to unfold the last layer. Not courage. Not confidence. The quiet space Kalen kept open for me. I pulled the silk free. The old page slipped into my palm. Thin and dark with age. Its silver script dim until the light from my mark touched it, then every line woke at once. Gasps broke across the gallery like glass beads dropped on marble. Caleb Shaw stepped closer, one hand lifted to keep the guards behind him from moving. Marion Greer covered her mouth with 2 fingers, not in shock, but in recognition. Hale only smiled wider. There it is, he said softly. The stolen archive page. The word stolen struck exactly where he aimed it. Several nobles shifted. A stolen page could be dismissed. A hidden page could be criminal. A desperate Omega with secret evidence could be made to look like a manipulator instead of a witness. Hale had prepared the room for that turn before I ever arrived. I flattened the parchment carefully on the evidence table. My hand still did not shake. I was proud of that, in a distant way, as if watching someone else remain steady. This page was removed from the Serpent Emergency Code, I said. It names a serpent-marked consort as lawful witness and equal authority during council compromise. Hale laughed once, quiet and almost kind. A charming performance. Unfortunately, ancient pages are not valid without a royal seal. He stepped down from the platform at last, silver robes whispering behind him. Look closely, all of you. No seal. No registration stamp. No witness cord. A loose page hidden by a condemned consort, presented at the exact moment his case collapses. This is not law. This is theater. The court leaned toward the parchment. I looked too, though I already knew. The lower corner was empty. The place where a seal should have been held only a faint circular stain, pale as old moonlight. For half a second, my chest hollowed out. I had carried that page under execution silk. I had built every remaining hope around it. Hale had known the whole time that one missing mark could make truth sound unfinished. Kalen's voice came from beside me, steady but very low. Where is the seal? Hale turned his pleasant face toward him. Lost to history, Your Majesty. As I said, unstable law. Dangerous to use. Dangerous to misread. Dangerous to let an anxious Omega build fantasies around it. The old shame rose again, automatic and sour. Anxious Omega. Defective Omega. Condemned Omega. Every label was a hand trying to push my head down. This time, Kalen moved before I could fold under it. He did not raise his voice. He simply stepped to my side, not in front of me, and placed one unloved hand on the table beside the parchment. His scales glowed gold at the edge of his wrist. Mine answered in silver. Do not reduce him because you fear what he read, Kalen said. Hale's eyes flicked to our hands, close but not touching. I fear disorder. That is the burden of governance. No, Marion said suddenly. Every face turned to her. She was staring at the empty seal circle on the page. Not lost. Hale's expression cooled. Physician Greer, this is no longer a medical matter. It is exactly a medical matter. She stepped closer. The old sovereign seal was never stamped in wax. That is why forgers stopped using this class of document. The seal was responsive. She looked at Kalen, then at me. It required the living bond. The room seemed to tilt toward those words. Hale snapped, speculation. The oath water darkened. Not a lot. Just enough. Everyone saw it. Hale froze. The small black shimmer at the bottom of the bowl spread like ink in clear rainwater. For the first time, the court did not whisper. It waited. Marion's voice sharpened. Chancellor, did you know the seal was responsive? Hale's mouth closed. Kalen looked at the oath bowl, then back at Hale. Answer. Hale said nothing. A silence under serpent oath is not a lie. But it can be a confession with better manners. Kalen turned to me, and the entire court vanished from his face. Julian. May I? He held out his hand. Palm upward. Beside the page. Not demanding. Asking. My pulse kicked against my throat. I knew what he was asking, not for obedience, not for forgiveness. For trust. Publicly. In the same room where I had tried to divorce him to save his life. I placed my marked wrist near his. This time, I let our hands touch. Just lightly. His fingers closed around mine with a care so exact it made my eyes burn. The parchment flared. Silver from my mark and gold from his scales ran down our joined hands and across the page, threading through the old script until it reached the empty circle at the bottom. The stain brightened. Lines appeared where there had been nothing, first faint, then clear, forming the crest of a crowned serpent wrapped around two names. Kalen Vex. Julian Cross. Not beneath his. Beside his. The sacred serpent beneath the palace gave one deep, resonant sound. And every locked door in the court shuddered in answer. The oath water turned completely clear. Caleb Shaw dropped to one knee, this time he did not look embarrassed. Lawful co-sovereign confirmed, Marian said, her voice carrying to the highest balcony. The court broke open. Nobles stood. Some bowed. Some looked furious. Some looked terrified, because terror was what people felt when a person they had stepped over suddenly became someone they were required to answer. Hale's face lost every trace of warmth. The bond may be confirmed, he said, louder now. But the threat remains. A co-sovereign who concealed evidence during a treason inquiry has compromised court order. Under emergency protocol, he must be isolated until a review can be completed. He lifted his hand. Several guards near the side aisle moved, uncertain, but trained. Caleb rose immediately and stepped between them and the table. No further approach without direct sovereign order. Hale's eyes flashed. I gave an order through lawful council authority. Caleb looked at Kalen, then at me. His voice steadied. Council authority is under review for compromise. That was the moment Hale stopped pretending. You foolish children, he said, and the softness was gone, stripped down to iron. Do you think a glowing page fixes a kingdom? The sovereign was failing. The serpent was unstable. Nobles were preparing succession petitions. Foreign courts were circling. I did what was necessary to keep Arden from collapsing under a sentimental bond to an untrained Omega no one wanted. The last words rang through the court. No one wanted. There it was. Not law. Not safety. The rotten heart beneath the silver robe. Kalen's hand tightened around mine once, not enough to hurt, only enough to remind me I was not standing alone. But I found I did not need him to answer for me. Not this time. I turned to the oath bowl. Chancellor Hale, I said, and my voice did not break. Did you order the dampening seal placed on our ceremony ribbon? His jaw flexed. The water waited. Yes, he said finally. A black mark appeared at his wrist, not for the answer, but for every previous silence surrounding it. The gallery recoiled. I kept going. Did you arrange for the vial to be placed in my room? For national security. The water darkened. Yes or no? His eyes burned into mine. Yes. A second mark. I heard someone sob softly in the gallery. I did not look. Did you order execution silk before any charge had been lawfully filed? Hale looked at Kalen. Kalen looked back without mercy. But he did not speak over me. This was mine now. Hale understood that too. And he hated it more than the locked doors. Yes. The third mark appeared, darker than the others. The court stared at his wrist, at the visible record of everything he had polished into procedure. My own wrist was still bright with silver. The mark uncovered. The hidden page no longer hidden. I looked at the nobles who had smiled when I entered in gray. Then the ending was written before the trial began, I said. And I was not the traitor in this room. The sacred serpent answered beneath us, a low sound that rolled through the marble and settled in the bones of the court. Hale stepped back. Not far. Just one step. It was enough. Kalen released my hand only after I let go first. Then he faced the room. His tail still sealing every exit. His coat still on my shoulders. His voice calm enough to be carved into law. Julian Cross stands recognized by Serpent Seal, sovereign bond, and oath-confirmed witness as lawful co-sovereign of Arden. Any order issued against him by this compromised council is void. Hale whispered, "You cannot undo the court with one sentence." I looked down at the parchment. At my name shining beside Kalen's. And finally understood why the old law called the consort a witness, not because he watched the throne, but because he watched the watchers. I lifted the page with both hands and turned it toward the gallery. "No," I said. "But the truth can." The truth did not explode through the court the way stories pretend truth does. It did not sweep every cruel person from the room in a single bright wave. It settled instead, heavy and undeniable, into the marble, into the oath water, into the black mark spreading across Chancellor Hale's wrist. Until everyone understood that leaving the room would not leave the truth behind. Kalen did not announce punishment with anger. He turned to Captain Shaw and said, "Secure the council record." Caleb moved at once. And this time, the guards followed him without looking to Hale first. That was the sound of power changing hands, not swords, not shouting, just obedience shifting toward the person who had earned it. The council table was sealed under oath. The forged statutes were collected. The red emergency protocol Hale had tried to use against me was placed beside the old serpent page, and under the clear light of the bond seal, its false clauses faded at the edges like cheap ink left in rain. Hale stood very still while Caleb read the charges aloud. Unlawful suppression of a sovereign bond. Falsification of court record. Misuse of execution procedure. Attempted isolation of a recognized co-sovereign. Conspiracy to seize legal control of the throne. Each phrase landed cleaner than revenge. I had imagined, in my worst moments, that justice would have to be loud to count. It did not. It could be a captain who had once escorted me in silence, now bowing before me and asking, "Your order, Consort Cross." The old title hung there, incorrect and unfinished. Caleb caught himself. His face tightened with shame. "Your order, Co-Sovereign Cross." The gallery heard it. So did I. My name did not sound like a borrowed code anymore. It sounded like something that could stand upright by itself. I looked at Hale. He expected fury. I could see him preparing for it, already shaping himself into a martyr of necessity, the loyal chancellor punished for what weak hearts could not do. I denied him that performance. "Hold him for a full public review," I said. "Every sealed order from his office for the last 5 years will be opened under oath. Any person punished by those orders gets a new hearing." Hale's mouth curled. "Merciful." "No," I said. "Documented." For the first time, his face truly changed, not fear of Kalen, not fear of the serpent, but fear of records. Fear of every hidden room being opened slowly enough that no one could call it chaos. Caleb bowed again, deeper this time, then directed the guards to escort Hale and the compromised council officials to the side chamber reserved for oath custody. No one handled them roughly. No one needed to. Their wrists already carried the court's answer in black scale marks everyone could see. When Hale passed me, he tried to stop close enough to speak. But Kalen's tail shifted between us, silent and absolute. Not striking. Not threatening. Simply refusing him access. I should have felt satisfaction. I did, a little. But mostly I felt tired in a place deeper than my body. The court was still looking at me. Some faces were pale with guilt. Some were calculating how quickly they could pretend they had always believed in me. Some were furious that the world had changed without asking their permission. Kalen saw me notice. Without speaking, he stepped away from the center aisle and moved back to my side, not in front of me this time, beside me. The difference mattered. Marion rewrapped my wrist with a plain white medical band, leaving the silver mark visible at the edge. "No more execution silk," she said briskly. But her fingers were careful. A small laugh escaped me. Thin and surprised. Kalen looked at me as if that tiny broken sound had undone him more than the entire trial. Then he reached for the divorce petition, or what remained of it. The first paper still lay on the table, my original signature dark beneath the failed seal. The second had become ash. Kalen picked up the surviving sheet and placed it in front of me. A hush fell again, nervous this time. Maybe they thought he would destroy it. Maybe they thought I would. Instead, Kalen removed the royal ring from his finger and set it on the table. Not in my hand. Not as a claim. But as a weight holding the paper flat. "You tried to use this to save my life," he said quietly. "The court tried to use it to erase yours. I will not use it to keep you." My throat tightened. He continued before I could find an answer. "By sunset, the North Wing will be unlocked in your name. Your family contract will be void. Your accounts will be separated from mine if you wish. If you want to leave Arden Palace, I will open the gates myself." Behind us, the doors were still sealed by his tail. The entire court could hear him giving me the freedom they had tried to make meaningless. "And if I stay?" I asked. His eyes held mine. Gold softened by something he still did not force into words. "Then you stay as my equal. Not my debt." For 3 months, I had believed love, if it existed here at all, would arrive as possession, instinct, a bond too old to argue with. But this was quieter. And far more dangerous to my defenses. Kalen Vex could lock every door in the royal court, and still the first real thing he offered me was an exit. I looked down at the divorce paper. My signature, once a goodbye, waited at the bottom like a question. I picked up the pen the clerk had dropped earlier. Its silver tip felt cold between my fingers. On the blank back of the divorce petition, I wrote the first decree of the restored co-sovereign court. No Omega in Arden may be sentenced, severed, confined, or declared defective by bloodline, scent, bond status, or family contract without independent oath review and personal testimony. Marion read it aloud. Caleb signed as witness. Kalen signed beside me, not above me. When the serpent seal appeared, it did not burn the page. It warmed it. Gold and silver threading through the paper until the old divorce petition became something else entirely. A law. A beginning. The doors finally opened. Sunlight from the outer hall spilled across the marble where I had stood in gray hours earlier, waiting to be arraigned. No one told me to move. No one blocked me when I stepped forward. Kalen stayed 1 pace behind, close enough to catch me if I fell, far enough to prove he would not decide my direction. I reached the threshold and stopped. Beyond the court lay the long corridor to the sea balcony, the open gates, the road down the cliff. Every exit I had prayed for and never thought I would see. I looked back at the man who had locked the doors to keep the liars in, then opened them to let me choose. "I am not ready to forgive everything," I said. Kalen bowed his head. "I know." I touched the edge of his coat still around my shoulders. "But I am ready to write the next law." His tail, no longer a barrier, curved quietly behind us like a wall against the wind. Together, we walked out of the court. And for the first time in Arden Palace, every door opened from my side. That night, Arden Palace sounded different. The ocean still struck the cliff below the western balcony. The wind still moved through the white stone arches. And the old tower still carried every footstep like a secret. But the silence had changed shape. It was no longer the silence of people pretending not to see me. It was the silence after a door has opened, and everyone is waiting to learn what kind of world walks through it. Kalen stood beside me at the balcony rail. Close enough that his coat brushed my sleeve. Careful enough that the space between us still belonged to me. Below us, the court windows glowed warm against the dark. Inside, clerks were already copying the first decree under Marion Greer's supervision, and Captain Shaw had sent writers to reopen old cases sealed by Hale's office. My wrist mark rested uncovered in the moonlight. Silver and steady. Kalen's scales answered softly at the edge of his hand. Neither of us said the word forever. We had both been trapped by too many words written by other people. But when the wind turned cold, Kalen lowered his scent just enough to warm the air around me without crowding it. And I let myself lean 1 inch closer. Not because the bond pulled me. Because I chose to. Extra story. The first time Julian Cross realized something was wrong, he was standing in the middle of the Royal Archive with a stack of legal reforms in his arms and a headache that felt like someone had driven a silver spike through his temple. It was 3 months after the trial. 3 months since the court doors had opened and he had walked out as co-sovereign instead of a corpse. 3 months since Kalen Vex had placed his coat over Julian's shoulders and offered him an exit he had not taken. The headache was new. So was the nausea. And the heat that curled low in his stomach every time Kalen walked into a room, not a bad heat, not the desperate, clawing kind he had read about in Omega health manuals, but something slower. Something that made him want to press his face into Kalen's neck and breathe until his lungs forgot how to ache. He told himself it was stress. He told himself it was the pressure of rewriting half the kingdom's laws while nobles who had once called him defective now bowed and called him your grace with faces that had not quite forgotten how to sneer. He told himself a lot of things. None of them were true. It was Marion Greer who figured it out, because of course it was. She had been Julian's personal physician since the trial, a position she had accepted with the same brisk efficiency she brought to everything. She did not bow excessively. She did not call him your grace unless she was in front of other people. She called him Julian and told him when he was being an idiot, and Julian loved her for it in a quiet, steady way he had never quite learned to express. Your scent has changed, she said one afternoon, without looking up from her notes. Julian froze halfway through removing his coat. My what? Your scent. Marion finally looked at him over the edge of her spectacles. You're not scentless anymore. Not entirely. It's faint, most people wouldn't notice. But I've been monitoring your pheromone levels since the trial, and there's been a steady increase over the past 6 weeks. Julian stared at her. That's not possible. I've been scentless my entire life. Your entire life. You were also bonded to a serpent king whose connection to you was being actively suppressed by an illegal dampening seal. Marion set down her pen. The seal is gone. The bond is active. Your body is finally doing what it was always supposed to do. She stood and walked to a cabinet, pulling out a small glass vial filled with pale silver liquid. I need a blood sample. Julian rolled up his sleeve without arguing. His wrist mark, the silver crescent of scales that had appeared in the courtroom, was warm against his skin, pulsing faintly in time with his heartbeat. It had been doing that more often lately. He had assumed it was just the bond settling. Marion drew the blood in silence, then capped the vial and held it up to the light. Her expression shifted. Not quite surprise. More like confirmation of something she had already suspected. How long have you been experiencing nausea? She asked. Julian blinked. A few weeks. It's nothing. It's not nothing. Marion set the vial down carefully. Julian, I need you to tell me if you've had any unusual sensations during your heats. Julian's face went hot. I don't have heats. I've never. You've never had a proper heat because your scent expression was suppressed, Marion interrupted. That's changed now. The bond is active. Your body is responding to Kaelin's presence in ways it couldn't before. Have you noticed anything? Julian opened his mouth to say no. Then he remembered the way his skin had prickled the night before when Kaelin had brushed past him in the hallway. The way his knees had gone weak for no reason. The way he had woken up at 3 in the morning with his heart racing and his sheets soaked through with sweat. Yes, he admitted quietly. Marion nodded like she had expected that answer. When was your last full heat cycle? I don't. I've never tracked them. I didn't think I had any. Well, you do now. Marion picked up her pen again. I'm going to run a full panel. In the meantime, I want you to stay close to Kaelin. Your body is going through a significant hormonal shift, and alpha proximity will help regulate it. Don't isolate yourself. Julian nodded, still dazed. Is something wrong with me? Marion looked at him with something that might have been pity, not the cruel kind, but the kind that came from knowing more than she was ready to say. Nothing wrong, she said. Just something unprecedented. 3 days later, Julian sat in the private sitting room of the North Wing with a medical report in his hands and his entire understanding of reality crumbling around him. Pregnancy confirmed. Estimated gestational period, 4 weeks. The words blurred. He blinked, and they blurred again. He was an Omega. He knew that. He had always known that. But he had also always been told he was defective, scentless, infertile, a closed investment. His family had signed him away with relief, not because they didn't want him, but because they hadn't expected him to be useful. An Omega who couldn't carry was worthless to the marriage market. Julian had accepted that a long time ago. He had built a life around being useful in other ways, quiet, observant, invisible. He had made peace with the idea that his body was just a vessel for other people's ambitions. But now there was something growing inside him. Something that had survived the curse displacement, the forged charges, the execution silk, the divorce papers that had turned to ash in his hands. Something that had taken root in the middle of a court that had tried to erase him. He pressed a hand to his stomach. It was flat. Normal. There was no sign of what Marion had found in his blood. But he could feel something, a warmth that wasn't quite warmth, a presence that wasn't quite a presence. Like the mark on his wrist had reached inward and found a place to settle. The door opened. Julian looked up. Kaelin stood in the doorway, still in his black coat from the council meeting, his dark hair slightly disheveled, his gold eyes immediately finding Julian's face. You weren't at dinner, Kaelin said. I came to check on you. Julian opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Kaelin stepped inside and closed the door behind him. The movement was careful, deliberate, the same restraint he always showed, the same refusal to crowd. It made Julian's chest ache. What happened? Kaelin asked, his voice dropping to something softer. Is it the curse? Did the residue come back? No. Julian shook his head. No, it's not the curse. It's... He looked down at the paper in his hands. Marion gave me some test results today. Kaelin crossed the room in 3 long strides. He didn't sit. He stood in front of Julian's chair, close enough to touch but not quite touching, waiting with that infinite patience that always made Julian want to break something and cry at the same time. Tell me, Kaelin said gently. Julian handed him the report. Kaelin read it in silence. His face didn't change. His scent didn't spike. But Julian saw the way his hand tightened on the paper, the subtle tremor that ran through his fingers. "I'm sorry," Julian said before he could stop himself. "I know this wasn't part of the plan. I know we never talked about." "Julian." Kaelin's voice was so quiet it almost wasn't there. "Why are you apologizing?" Julian looked away. "Because I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be this. I wasn't supposed to be able to have children. My whole life, everyone told me I was defective, and I believed them, and now," his voice broke. "Now I'm scared." Kaelin lowered himself to his knees in front of Julian's chair. It was such an unguarded gesture that Julian forgot how to breathe. The most feared alpha in Arden, kneeling on the floor of his consort's sitting room like a supplicant. "Look at me," Kaelin said. Julian forced himself to meet those gold eyes. "You are not defective," Kaelin said, each word precise as a blade. "You were never defective. They called you that because they wanted to control you. Because a scentless Omega was easier to erase. But I have watched you stand in a courtroom full of liars and speak the truth so clearly that the law itself bent to answer you. I have watched you carry pieces of a curse meant for me without complaint, without even knowing what you were doing. I have watched you rewrite a kingdom's laws with your own hand." He reached up and cupped Julian's cheek, his palm warm and rough against Julian's skin. "You are the strongest person I have ever met. And if you are scared, then I will be scared with you. But I will not let you face this alone." Julian's eyes burned. "You're not upset." Kaelin's thumb traced the curve of Julian's cheekbone. "I'm terrified," he admitted quietly. "But not because of you. Because of everything that could go wrong. Because I almost lost you once, and I don't think I could survive it again. Because this," he glanced down at Julian's stomach, and his expression shifted into something so raw and vulnerable that Julian felt his heart crack open. "This is something I never allowed myself to hope for." "You hoped for it?" Julian whispered. Kaelin's mouth curved into a half-smile. "I hoped for a lot of things I didn't think I deserved." Julian reached out and grabbed the front of Kaelin's coat, pulling him closer. Their foreheads touched. Their breaths mingled. And for the first time since reading that report, Julian felt something other than fear. "We're going to be terrible at this," Julian said. "Probably," Kaelin agreed. "We don't know what we're doing." "Definitely not. And the council is going to lose their minds when they find out." Kaelin laughed, a real laugh, low and warm, the kind Julian had only heard a handful of times. "Let them." Julian kissed him. It was clumsy and urgent and tasted faintly of salt. Kaelin's hand slid into his hair, not pulling, just holding, just steadying. When they finally broke apart, Julian was shaking, but it wasn't from cold. "Marion said I need to stay close to you," Julian admitted. "My heats are going to change. My body is adjusting." Kaelin's eyes darkened. Not with hunger, with concern. "How do you feel right now?" Julian considered the question. "Warm," he said slowly. "Not like a fever. Like I want to be near you. Like being away from you makes my skin itch." Kaelin nodded like that made perfect sense. "That's the bond," he said. "It's stabilizing. Your body is learning to recognize me as a viable partner." Julian flushed. "That sounds clinical." "It is clinical." Kaelin's fingers traced the line of Julian's jaw. "But that doesn't mean it's not also everything else." Julian leaned into the touch. He didn't know how to say what he was feeling, gratitude, terror, hope, love, so he let his actions speak for him. He shifted forward until he was half in Kaelin's lap, his face pressed into the curve of Kaelin's neck, breathing in the scent of cedar and rain and something deeper, something ancient. Kalen's arms came around him, one hand settling low on his back, the other cradling the back of his head. "I've got you," Kalen murmured. "I've got you." Julian closed his eyes and let himself believe it. The pregnancy was not easy. Julian had known it wouldn't be. His body was doing something it had never been designed to do, or rather, something it had been designed to do but had been prevented from doing for 26 years. The hormonal shift was brutal. His heats came more frequently, each one more intense than the last, and each time Kalen was there, steady and patient, guiding him through the worst of it with a gentle hand and a steady scent. "You're doing so well," Kalen would murmur, pressing cool cloths to Julian's forehead. "Just breathe. I'm right here." Julian would cling to him like a lifeline, riding out the waves of heat and need, and when it was over, Kalen would hold him through the exhaustion, never once making him feel like a burden. The nausea was worse. Julian couldn't keep anything down for the first 3 weeks. He lost weight. His face went pale. Kalen practically moved into the north wing, bringing tea and broth and whatever Julian thought he might be able to stomach, staying up with him through the nights when the sickness was worst. "You don't have to do this," Julian said one morning, miserable and wrung out. "You have a kingdom to run." Kalen pressed a kiss to his forehead. "The kingdom can wait. You can't." The first time Julian felt the baby move, he was alone. It was early evening, and Kalen was in a council meeting, a short one, he'd promised, just to approve the new trade agreements. Julian had been lying on the bed, one hand pressed to his stomach, when something fluttered beneath his palm. He went still. It happened again. A tiny shift, barely perceptible, like a fish brushing against the inside of a glass bowl. Julian's breath caught. He pressed harder, trying to feel it again, and this time there was a definite response, a little kick, or maybe a roll, impossible to describe but unmistakable. He started laughing. He couldn't help it. It was so absurd, so miraculous, that he laughed until tears ran down his cheeks. Kalen found him like that 10 minutes later, still laughing, still crying, both hands pressed to his stomach. "What happened?" Kalen demanded, crossing the room in 3 quick strides. "Are you hurt? Should I get Marion?" "Kalen." Julian grabbed his wrist and pulled his hand to his stomach. "Wait. Just wait." Kalen went rigid, his hand frozen against Julian's shirt. "Julian, what?" The baby kicked again, strong enough that Julian felt it clearly. Kalen's eyes went wide. His mouth opened. No sound came out. "Did you feel that?" Julian whispered. Kalen nodded slowly, his expression dazed. "I felt it." "Your son," Julian said, and his voice cracked on the word. "Or daughter. I don't know which yet. But they just kicked me." Kalen lowered himself to his knees beside the bed, his hands still pressed against Julian's stomach. The bond mark on his wrist glowed gold. Julian's answered in silver. "Hello," Kalen said, his voice so soft it was barely audible. "I'm your father. The other one is Julian. He's the one doing all the hard work. I'm just the one who loves him." He glanced up at Julian, and there were tears in his eyes, gold and bright and unashamed. "I love you so much." Julian reached down and tangled his fingers in Kalen's hair. "I know," he said. "I love you too." The birth was the hardest thing Julian had ever done. He had known it would be. Marion had warned him, serpent blood, she'd said, makes for an unusual gestation. The baby would be strong. The labor would be intense. Julian had nodded and said he understood, but he hadn't understood. Not really. The pain was like nothing he had ever experienced. It tore through him in waves, each one worse than the last, until he couldn't remember a time before it. He was in the private berthing suite in the north wing, surrounded by soft lighting and warm blankets and the scent of cedar and rain that meant Kalen was close. "You're doing so well," Kalen said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "Just breathe. I'm right here." Julian squeezed his hand so hard he could feel the bones shift. "I can't, I don't think I can." "You can." Kalen pressed his forehead to Julian's. "You're the strongest person I know. You survived a courtroom full of people who wanted you dead. You survived the curse. You survived a divorce that tried to erase you. You can survive this." "Easy for you to say," Julian gasped. "You're not the one pushing a—" He broke off with a scream as another wave hit. Marian's voice cut through the haze. "He's crowning. One more push, Julian. Just one more." Julian pushed. The pain split him open. And then, suddenly, it was over. A baby's cry filled the room. Julian collapsed against the pillows, shaking and sobbing and laughing all at once. Kalen was saying something, he couldn't make out the words, but he felt the weight of a small, warm bundle being placed on his chest. He looked down. There was a baby. A real, actual baby. Tiny fingers. Tiny toes. A tuft of dark hair like Kalen's. And when the baby opened its eyes, they were silver, Julian's own color, rimmed with gold. "Hello," Julian whispered. "Hello, little one." Kalen leaned over his shoulder, and Julian could feel the tremor in his body, the barely suppressed emotion. "He's perfect," Kalen said. "He's absolutely perfect." "Or she," Julian said weakly. "Did Marian check?" "She did." Kalen's voice was thick. "It's a boy." "Julian, it's a boy." Julian laughed again, or maybe he was crying, he couldn't tell anymore. "You already have a name picked out, don't you?" Kalen flushed. "Maybe." "Tell me." Kalen looked at their son with something like wonder. "I was thinking. Aldrich. It means ruler of the old blood. And your middle name, the one your grandmother gave you, Evan. Aldrich Evan Vex." Julian stared at him. You named him after my grandmother?" "She was the only person in your family who ever believed in you," Kalen said quietly. "She wrote you letters, didn't she? Even after your parents stopped talking to you. I found them in your archive. I shouldn't have read them." "Kalen." Julian reached up and grabbed his face, pulling him down for a kiss. "I love it. I love him. I love you." Kalen kissed him back, soft and careful, mindful of the baby between them. "I love you too," he said. "Both of you." The first few weeks were chaos. Aldrich was a good baby, mostly. He slept in 3-hour stretches, fed well, and only cried when he needed something. But the disruption was still immense. Julian was exhausted, his body healing from the birth, his hormones crashing and stabilizing and crashing again. Kalen was trying to run a kingdom and be present for his family at the same time, and neither of them had any idea what they were doing. But they figured it out. They figured out how to work in shifts, Julian through the night, Kalen in the early mornings. They figured out how to balance council meetings with feedings, how to soothe Aldrich's cries with a song Julian had heard somewhere once, how to make each other laugh when the exhaustion became too much. "You have milk on your shirt," Kalen observed one evening, coming in from the council chamber. Julian looked down. "So I do. I'm going to be thinking about that for the entire meeting I just attended." Julian burst out laughing. "That's your own fault for having a breeding kink." Kalen's face went red. "I don't, that's not," he ran a hand through his hair. "You're impossible. You're the one who put a baby in me. I'm never going to live that down, am I? Never, Julian agreed cheerfully. Now come hold your son while I change my shirt. Kaelin crossed the room and took Aldrich from Julian's arms, cradling him with the ease of practice. The baby blinked up at him with those impossible eyes, silver and gold, exactly like the bond mark on their wrists. You know, Kaelin said quietly, I never thought I'd have this. Julian paused in the middle of unbuttoning his shirt. What? A family. Kaelin glanced up at him. I was raised to believe that being sovereign meant being alone. That I couldn't afford attachments. That anyone who got close to me would either be a target or a liability. And then you came along. His voice dropped. You were supposed to be a political arrangement. A formality. And instead, he shook his head. You saved my life. You rewrote my laws. You gave me this. Julian finished changing his shirt and crossed back to Kaelin, wrapping his arms around both of them. You gave me a choice, he said quietly. Everyone else in my life decided who I was supposed to be. You just let me be. And then you held the door open so I could leave if I wanted to. That was the first time anyone ever did that for me. Kaelin leaned into him, and Julian could feel the tension drain out of his body. I love you, Kaelin said. I love our son. I love the life we're building. Julian pressed his lips to Kaelin's forehead. Me too, he said. All of it. The public announcement was a calculated event. Kaelin had wanted to protect Julian and Aldrich from the court scrutiny for as long as possible. But the pregnancy had been difficult to hide, Julian's scent had continued to develop, his body had changed, and rumors had started spreading through the palace like wildfire. So they planned a ceremony. It was held in the Great Hall, the same room where Julian had been nearly executed 6 months earlier. But the execution silk was gone. The divorce petitions were gone. The silver-robed council members were gone, replaced by a new body of advisors, handpicked by Kaelin and Julian together. Julian stood at the front of the hall with Aldrich in his arms. The baby was dressed in a tiny black coat that matched Kaelin's, his dark hair mussed, his silver-gold eyes blinking sleepily at the crowd. Kaelin stood beside him, one hand on Julian's back, his scent calm and steady. Today, Kaelin announced to the assembled court, we welcome the next heir to the throne of Arden. Aldrich Evan Vex, son of Sovereign Kaelin Vex and co-sovereign Julian Cross. The crowd erupted into applause. Some of it was genuine. Some of it was performance. Julian didn't care. He looked at the people who had once called him defective, and he felt nothing but quiet triumph. They had tried to erase him. They had failed. He looked at Kaelin, at the love in those gold eyes, and he smiled. Ready to go home? Kaelin asked softly. Julian nodded. Ready. They walked out of the great hall together, their son between them, the bond marks on their wrists glowing silver and gold in the afternoon light. Behind them, the doors of Arden Palace stood open, not locked, not sealed, just open. And Julian Cross, once the invisible Omega no one wanted, finally stepped into the life he had built for himself. The end.